Hi guys, have you ever wondered what it would feel like to stand on the shores of a cold northern sea, the mist rolling in, and suddenly hear the rhythmic sound of oars cutting through the water? Have you imagined the moment when a sleek, dragon-headed ship emerges from the fog, its carved prow gleaming in the dim light of dawn, and a crew of fierce warriors set their eyes on distant horizons? Tonight, we begin a journey through time into the age of the Vikings and into the heart of their most enduring symbol, the longship. This isn't just a vessel. It's a story carved in wood, a floating legend, a creation that carried explorers, raiders, and dreamers into the unknown. So, as you settle into the calm of the evening, dim the light and allow yourself to drift back through the centuries, let me take you to the beginning of the tale. Long before the name Viking struck fear across Europe, the northern lands of Scandinavia shaped a people bound by the sea. The rugged coastlines, scattered islands, and deep fjords of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark made water the thread that connected communities. Land was scarce, winters were harsh, and the forests were dark and endless. But the sea, was freedom. It offered fish, trade, escape, and opportunity. To master it, the Norse people needed more than simple boats. They needed something that could glide like an arrow, endure the storms, and carry them further than any horizon dared to promise. Out of this need, the longship was born. Imagine the first spark of inspiration. A chieftain, perhaps, watching a wooden fishing boat struggle against the currents, its broad hull too heavy, too slow. He dreams of something different, lighter, faster, strong enough to pierce the waves. Over time, with each generation, carpenters experimented. They studied how water flowed, how wind carried sails, how balance and weight made the difference between survival and ruin. Slowly, the art of shipbuilding became a craft, and the longship grew from imagination into wood and iron. Close your eyes and picture the building site. On the edge of a fjord, men gather timber from the surrounding forests. Axes strike with rhythmic precision, splitting oak and pine. The smell of fresh wood mixes with the salty air. Each log is carefully chosen, not simply for size, but for strength, for the grain that would bend without breaking. They know that a longship must be light, yet durable, flexible, yet firm. With adzes and chisels, the shipwrights carve planks so thin and smooth that they almost sing when struck. These planks are overlapped in a style called clinker building, like scales on a fish held together by iron rivets, hammered red hot and cooled into place. This overlapping design isn't just beautiful. It gives the ship strength and flexibility, allowing it to ride the waves instead of resisting them. Day after day, the skeleton of the longship rises from the ground. A keel forms its spine, strong and straight. Ribs stretch outward, curving into shape. Slowly, the vessel takes form, like a living creature being born. At the prow, a carver works on something extraordinary. The figurehead. Sometimes it is a snarling dragon, jaws wide, teeth sharp, meant to terrify enemies and evil spirits alike. Other times it is a serpent, or even something abstract and swirling, a reminder of the mysteries of the sea. Whatever the design, it is more than decoration. It is a guardian, a spirit that sails with the crew. Now imagine the day of launching. The villagers gather, their voices rising in anticipation. Men push and pull, straining as the ship slides over logs toward the water. At last, it meets the sea, and the waves welcome it. A cheer erupts as the longship floats, proud and alive, ready to taste its destiny. The crew climbs aboard, gripping the long oars. With a shout, they row in unison, the rhythm steady, their muscles straining as the ship leaps forward like a hunting beast. And then, with the wind catching the great square sail of wool, the longship transforms. Suddenly, it is not just a boat, it is a force, cutting across the water at astonishing speed. To see it then, for the first time, must have been like seeing freedom take shape. But what made the Viking Longship so revolutionary? To understand, we must step closer. Its shallow draft meant it could sail across open seas, but also slip into rivers, even shallow ones, where no other vessel dared. Imagine the shock of monks in a quiet monastery, miles inland, when a dragon-headed ship appeared on the horizon of a riverbank, as if it had sprung from nowhere. The longship made every coastline vulnerable, every river a gateway. It turned Europe into an open door. Yet the longship wasn't just for raiding. It carried traders, settlers, and explorers. Across the North Sea, they sailed to the British Isles. Across the Baltic, they touched Russia's rivers. Across the Atlantic, they reached Iceland, Greenland, and even Vinland, a mysterious land many believe to be North America. Think of that for a moment. Centuries before Columbus, a Viking longship carried men like Leif Erikson across uncharted waters, their sails full of courage, their hearts full of restless wonder. Life aboard, though, was not easy. The crew of perhaps 30 to 60 men lived together in close quarters. They slept beneath the open sky, wrapped in cloaks, with little shelter from storms or biting cold. Their provisions were simple dried fish, bread, mead, and water stored in barrels. The sea was a harsh companion, and every man knew that one storm could claim them all. Yet they endured, because the longship was not just transport, it was identity. To be aboard was to belong, to be part of a brotherhood bound by oars, wind, and destiny. Picture a voyage now. The crew rises before dawn, frost still clinging to the edges of their beards. With the beat of the steersman's drum, they pulled the oars in rhythm, the longship slicing forward. Hours pass, arms ache, but the horizon draws them on. Suddenly, the wind shifts, and the sail is raised. The ship surges, and the men cheer, relief washing over them as the wind takes the burden. The coastline recedes, and the endless sea stretches before them. Some sing, their voices carrying over the waves. Others sharpen axes and swords, preparing for what lies ahead. Each man knows that beyond the sea waits either glory or death. The longship was not just a machine of war, it was a canvas of culture. Its sides were painted, its sails dyed bright red or striped with patterns. Shields were hung along the rail, a wall of color that turned the vessel into a floating banner. When the fleet gathered dozens of longships side by side, the sight was breathtaking. A storm of wood and cloth and iron sweeping across the horizon. Enemies trembled at the very image, for they knew that where the longship sailed, the world changed. And yet, behind this fearsome image, there was also pride and poetry. Skalds, the poets of the Vikings, sang of the ships as living beings. They gave them names: Sea Serpent, Wave Rider, Wind's Horse. To the Norse, the longship was not wood and iron, but soul and spirit. It was a gift of the gods, a symbol of fate. They believed that even in death, when a great chieftain passed, he might be laid within a ship, buried in earth, or set aflame on the water, carried into the afterlife on the vessel that had carried him in life. So tonight, imagine the stars above, guiding men who had no compass, only the sun, the moon, and the wisdom of generations. Picture the glow of torches on the deck, the glint of axes, the whisper of prayers to Odin, Thor, and Freya. This is not just history, it is memory, carved into the sea. The longship glided silently along the misty waters, its dragon-headed prow cutting the fog like a predator searching for prey. The crew had grown used to the endless rhythm of oars and sails, the pull and release, the sound of wood groaning under strain, the slap of waves against the clinker-built hull. They were bound not only by muscle and sweat, but by purpose. Ahead lay the unknown shores of foreign lands, and with every heartbeat, the men felt both anticipation and unease. The longship was their weapon, their sanctuary, and their fate. The steersman, a seasoned warrior with hair bleached by salt and sun, guided the ship with the great steering oar fixed to the starboard side. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for the faintest sign of land. He knew the coastline of the Frankish kingdoms was near, and with it the promise of silver, food, and glory. The chieftain stood near the mast, tall and broad, his cloak of wool and fur whipping in the wind. His voice carried across the deck as he reminded his men of the plan. They would strike fast before dawn, when the monks of the monastery still knelt in prayer, when villagers still dreamed in their cottages. As the longship neared shore, the crew rowed harder, their breaths misting in the cold air. The prow surged forward, and the keel scraped against the pebbled beach. The men leaped into the shallow water, boots splashing, weapons raised. The dragon's head seemed to roar silently as the warriors surged inland. Behind them, the longship waited patiently, anchored in the sand, its black sail furled, its shields hanging like silent guardians. The ship was more than a vessel of war, it was a base, a refuge, a swift means of retreat should the tide of battle turn against them. The raid was brutal and swift. Flames licked at wooden huts, the clang of steel echoed in the dawn, and the cries of the conquered rose with the smoke. When the Vikings returned to their ship, their arms were heavy with plunder crosses of gold, silver chalices, sacks of grain, barrels of wine. Prisoners, bound and terrified, were herded toward the waiting longship. The crew loaded their spoils onto the deck, stacking shields, tying ropes around barrels, securing everything for the journey home. With practiced precision, they pushed the vessel back into the waves, climbing aboard as the oars slid into place. Within moments, the longship was alive again, cutting through the water with frightening speed. To those left behind, it was as if a storm had swept through their world, vanishing as quickly as it had come. The beauty of the longship lay not only in its ability to strike, but in its ability to disappear. It could slip into rivers that led deep into the heart of kingdoms. It could vanish into the open sea, carried by the wind toward distant lands. Its shallow draft allowed it to beach almost anywhere, avoiding harbors and fortifications. Where others were trapped by geography, the Vikings were freed by their ships. The longship turned the map of Europe into an open invitation. Weeks later, the same crew found themselves sailing along the Seine River. The banks rose green and fertile on either side, dotted with villages. Farmers working their fields looked up in horror as the dragon-headed vessel swept past, its oars glinting in the sun. The crew rowed with discipline, shields hanging in neat rows along the sides, axes glimmering at their belts. They sang as they moved, their deep voices blending with the steady splash of oars. The longship was no longer just a tool of war. It was a spectacle, a message written in wood and iron that declared, "We are here, and we cannot be stopped." Paris itself would tremble at the sight of such ships. In the year 8, the legendary Viking chieftain Ragnar Lothbrok sailed a fleet of longships up the Seine, laying siege to the heart of Frankish power. Their dragon heads rearing as though alive, their sails blotting out the horizon. The city walls could not protect against vessels that struck from the water, unloading warriors with the speed of thunder. It was the long ship that gave Ragnar his reach, that made a remote Norse chieftain a nightmare whispered in royal halls. But not all voyages were about fire and steel. Many longships carried settlers across treacherous seas in search of new homes. Families, livestock, tools, and dreams crowded the decks. Imagine a young woman holding her child close as the ship rocks beneath her, her eyes fixed on the horizon, wondering if the land ahead will be fertile, if the winters will be kind. The longship was not only a vessel of conquest, but of hope. It carried men and women to Iceland, to Greenland, and further still, across the Atlantic. The journey to Iceland was perilous, but the reward was rich land untouched by plow or axe. Yet the ships endured, bending with the waves instead of breaking, their clinker-built planks flexing like muscles. Each successful voyage added to the legend of the longship, proving that no distance was too great, no ocean too wide. When they reached new lands, the longship was hauled ashore, becoming shelter, workshop, and symbol. Its wood might be repurposed into houses, its sail into clothing, its nails into tools. But often it was preserved, pulled back into the water again when exploration called to the settlers. It was lifeline and link, the promise that they were never truly cut off from their kin across the sea. The longship also played a role in diplomacy and trade. Not every encounter with foreign shores ended in fire. Many times the sight of a Viking ship meant furs, amber, iron, and walrus ivory were about to be exchanged for silver, silk, wine, and spices. The same shallow draft that allowed for raids also allowed for commerce, carrying goods to markets that spanned from Constantinople to the far northern reaches of the White Sea. The longship was a bridge between worlds, a traveler's companion, a merchant's cart. But even in these peaceful ventures, the longship retained its aura of awe. Its prow still bore the dragon, its shields still lined the rails. Even when arriving as traders, the Vikings carried the unspoken warning that they were capable of far more than barter. The ship itself was the message. We come as friends, but remember what we can do. Through it all, the longship remained central to Viking identity. It appeared in their sagas, in their poetry, in their art. Warriors dreamed of dying in battle and being carried to Valhalla aboard a ship of flame. Chieftains were buried in their vessels, surrounded by treasures, as if ready to sail into the afterlife. The ship was not only a machine of wood and iron, it was a myth made real, a sacred companion. One can almost hear the sound of a fleet assembling, dozens of longships gathering at the mouth of a fjord. The water churns as their oars beat in unison. The sails, striped red and white, billow like the wings of great birds. From the cliffs above, families watch with pride and fear, knowing their sons and husbands sail into danger, but also into glory. The fleet turns seaward, vanishing into the horizon, leaving behind only the echo of their songs. Night at sea was both beautiful and terrifying. The men lay huddled on the deck, staring at the stars, their breath fogging in the cold air. The creak of wood and the crash of waves became a lullaby. Some prayed to Thor for protection against storms, others too injured for favorable winds. The northern lights sometimes danced above them, green and red curtains shimmering across the sky, and the men whispered that it was the Valkyries riding across the heavens, guiding the chosen to their fate. The longship, small beneath the vastness of the cosmos, carried them steadily onward, a fragile shell defying the power of the sea. Storms were the true enemy. When waves rose like mountains, the ship pitched and rolled, threatening to snap in two. Men bailed water desperately, their muscles burning, their voices hoarse with cries to the gods. Lightning split the sky, thunder shook the air, and the ocean seemed determined to swallow them whole. But the long ship, built with care and skill, bent but did not break. It rode the waves like a living thing, leaping, diving, rising again. Many crews owed their survival not to luck, but to the genius of the shipwrights who had shaped oak into endurance. The legend of the longship spread far beyond Scandinavia, to the English, the Franks, the Slavs, and the Byzantines. The sight of its prow meant the arrival of men who could not be ignored. Even in lands where the Vikings settled peacefully, the memory of the ship lingered, etched into the minds of those who saw it. It became a symbol of movement, of power, of the will to cross boundaries that others dared not cross. And always, when the ship returned home, it was greeted with reverence. Villagers gathered on the shore, waving and cheering as their warriors returned. Children ran into the surf, splashing as the ships slid onto the sand. Women embraced their husbands and sons, eyes bright with relief and pride. The longship, scarred by salt and battle, rested once more in the fjord, its journey written in every plank. As the firelight flickered on the shore that night, the crew feasted, their laughter carrying across the water. Without it, none of their triumphs, none of their journeys would have been possible. They sang songs of dragons and waves, of battles won and storms survived. And as the night deepened and the torches burned low, the longship waited patiently, its dragon head staring into the darkness, ready for the next call of destiny. The world was wide, and the longship was always hungry for the horizon. The flames of the shoreline faded into memory as the longship pushed further into the wide world, its sails swelling with the wind of destiny. For the men who rode and slept on its deck, every new horizon promised both danger and wonder. Their dragon-headed vessel was not simply a machine of war anymore. It had become the very heartbeat of an age, carrying its people into lands unknown. Far to the east, rivers cut like veins through the lands of the Slavs and Rus. The longships followed these winding waters, their shallow keels gliding where no other seafaring craft could dare. Through forests and swamps, past villages of timber huts, they rode with steady rhythm, their shields hanging in ordered rows along the rails. To the people of these riverbanks, the arrival of longships meant the sudden appearance of Norse traders and warriors deep in the continent's interior. Some came with open hands, offering furs, amber, and weapons. Others came with swords, unsheathed, demanding tribute. Yet always the ship itself was the first and most powerful message it could reach anywhere. It could vanish just as quickly, and it carried with it the unspoken promise of both wealth and ruin. The rivers carried the Norse southward, toward the shining city of Constantinople. Imagine the sight of Viking longships arriving before the walls of the Byzantine capital, their dragon prows gleaming in the sun, their sails striped and bold. The rulers of the city knew these men by reputation. They called them the Varangians, and they feared their wrath. but also valued their loyalty. In time, the Vikings became the personal guards of the Byzantine emperors, their longships resting in foreign harbors far from the fjords of the north. To stand before the gates of Constantinople was to stand at the edge of the known world. And it was the longship that had carried them there. But even greater journeys awaited. To the west, the North Atlantic stretched like a great challenge, vast and wild. The longship met it head-on. Crews set out from Norway, braving the restless ocean in search of land whispered about in tales. First came the Faroe Islands, then Iceland, a volcanic island of black rock and green pastures. The ships landed, and settlers stepped ashore, their eyes scanning the new horizon, their hearts pounding with relief that the sea had not claimed them. They built farms, raised halls, and carved new lives, but they never forgot the ships that had borne them there. From Iceland, the longships pressed further. Greenland lay waiting, harsh and unforgiving, its coastlines cold and jagged, yet rich enough to support colonies. It was not an easy place, but the ships carried families who were willing to endure the hardships. On their decks, sheep bleated, tools clanged, and hopes swelled like sails. Each plank of wood beneath their feet seemed to hum with the promise of survival. And then, even beyond Greenland, a legend stirred. They called it Vinlandaland across the western sea, rich with grapes and wild forests. Leif Erikson set his course for this mysterious shore, and his longship became the first known European vessel to touch the soil of North America. Picture that moment, the ship sliding into a bay fringed with pine and sand, the crew stepping onto a continent no Norseman had ever seen. The longship rested in the shallows, its dragon head staring inland as though it, too, wondered what lay beyond. Fires were lit, shelters raised, and for a brief time the Norse held a foothold in a land across the ocean. Though their stay was short, the memory endured, carved into sagas, carried on by the waves of time. The longship had stretched human reach farther than ever before, proving that no sea was too wide for its prow. Back in Scandinavia, life without the longship was unthinkable. Children grew up watching their fathers carve timber, hearing the rhythmic strike of axes and adzes. Boys dreamed of their first voyage, of gripping an oar and feeling the ship surge beneath them. Girls, too, understood its importance, for many would sail with families to new lands, their lives tied to the ship as tightly as any rope to its mast. Elders spoke of great voyages around the fire, their voices rising and falling like the tide. The ship was not only wood and iron, it was a living tradition, handed down through generations, and it was also a weapon of legend. In the British Isles, entire kingdoms trembled when rumors spread that longships had been sighted offshore. Coastal villages were abandoned in fear, bells rang in monasteries, and kings scrambled to raise defenses. The English called them sea wolves, and their prows were like the open jaws of beasts. Yet for all the terror, there was also a strange admiration. Chroniclers described their speed, their grace, their ability to appear and vanish like shadows. Enemies feared them, but they also marveled at their brilliance. For the crew, life aboard was a cycle of hardship and wonder. Days were filled with rowing, the sun beating down, muscles aching, blisters splitting. At night, the deck became a bed, the sail a blanket, the stars a roof. Salt stung their skin, and the ocean's spray was constant. Food was plain dried fish, hard bread, goat cheese, mead watered down to last. Yet in those hardships was a bond no land-bound life could offer. Men laughed together, sang together, fought together, and when storms rose, they prayed together. The longship was not only a vessel, it was a crucible, shaping men into brothers. Storms tested that bond most fiercely. The sea could turn from calm to fury in moments. Waves rose higher than the mast. Wind howled with the voice of giants, and rain lashed like whips. The ship rolled and pitched, the deck slick and treacherous. Water poured in, and men bailed desperately, their arms trembling with exhaustion. Oars snapped, sails tore, but still the ship held together. Its clinker-built hull flexed, its keel held steady, and again it delivered its crew from death. Survivors often said it was as though the ship itself chose to save them, as though it carried within it the will of the gods. Many longships never returned. They sank in storms, were lost in fog, or smashed against rocky coasts. Their crews vanished, swallowed by the sea. But even in loss, their legend grew. Stories spread of ghostly ships sailing under the moon, dragon heads gleaming in spectral light, their oars splashing silently. Fishermen claimed to hear their songs carried on the wind. The longship became not only a symbol of life and power, but also of mystery and the thin line between this world and the next. The rituals of death reflected this belief. When a great chieftain or warrior fell, sometimes he was laid within a ship, surrounded by treasures, weapons, and offerings. The vessel was buried beneath mounds of earth or set aflame on the water, its flames reaching to the heavens as the smoke carried the soul to the afterlife. To be given such a burial was the highest honor, a final voyage on the ship that had defined his life. The burning longship became an image so powerful that it endures even today, a symbol of farewell, of passage, of eternity. Yet the age of the longship was not eternal. As Europe changed, kingdoms grew stronger, fortifications taller, and new ships of heavier design began to dominate the seas. The Vikings themselves settled in lands they once raided, building towns and farms, turning from raiders into rulers. The longship, though still revered, slowly gave way to broader, sturdier vessels, built for cargo and defense rather than speed and stealth. But its spirit never vanished. The design lived on, influencing shipbuilding for centuries, and its legend burned in memory, too bright to fade. Still, even as its dominance waned, the longship's image endured in the sagas, in carved stones, in whispered tales. Children grew up hearing of their ancestors who had crossed seas, who had stood before the gates of Paris and Constantinople, who had reached unknown shores in the west. Every time they looked upon the fjords, they imagined the sails filling once more, the oars dipping into the dark waters, the dragon heads rising against the sky. The ship was no longer only wood, it had become myth. And so, as night settled over the northern world, the longship remained in dreams. Its prow still cut across the imagination, its sail still filled with the breath of gods, its oars still beat like a heart. It was more than a vessel, it was freedom, fear, hope, and fate. For centuries it had carried men and women across seas and into legend, and even when its time had passed, it sailed on in memory, untamed and eternal. The fjord lay quiet under the pale northern sky, its waters still, its cliffs casting long shadows. A single long ship rested on the shore, its hull scarred from voyages, its once bright shields faded by salt and time. Men walked around it, touching the wood as though greeting an old friend, their fingers tracing the grooves where oars had once struck, the iron rivets that had held it together against countless storms. The world was changing. Kingdoms rose where tribes had once stood, and castles of stone rose along coasts once open to sudden raids. Yet the longship remained proud and patient, as though aware that its time was drawing to a close, but unwilling to surrender its spirit. The crew, who still sailed such vessels, knew that they were part of something fading. New ships were being built, bulkier, heavier, designed for trade or defense rather than speed. But nothing could match the grace of the longship. Nothing could capture the way it seemed to fly across the water, alive under the hands of its rowers. Each voyage now felt like both a journey and a farewell, as though the ship carried not only its men, but the memory of an age slipping into legend. Yet there were still battles to fight. In the British Isles, Viking rulers had carved out kingdoms of their own. The longship carried armies across channels and rivers, delivering men into the heart of wars that reshaped the land. In Ireland, fleets of longships filled the rivers, their sails crowding the horizon, their prows gleaming like the teeth of beasts. In England, the great heathen army had marched inland, supported by ships that brought reinforcements and supplies with relentless precision. Even as the years passed, the longship remained a weapon that kings and jarls could not do without. But war had changed. Where once monasteries lay defenseless, stone walls rose, towers overlooked rivers, and bridges barred entry. The longship could still strike, still terrify, but the element of surprise was no longer absolute. Enemies had learned, and they had adapted. The Norse themselves began to change too, settling in lands they had once raided, trading more than plundering, building farms instead of burning them. The longship that had once been the sharp edge of chaos was slowly becoming the bridge between cultures. On its decks, warriors began to carry not only axes and spears, but goods for trade: grain, furs, wool, and iron. Markets buzzed with the sound of many tongues, and the longship stood moored beside the ships of Franks, English, and Slavs. For the first time, it was not always a symbol of fear, but also of connection. To see a dragon-headed prow at anchor was no longer only to expect fire and steel. It might also mean amber and silver, honey and wine. The ship had become many things at once: raider, trader, settler, messenger. Still, in the heart of every Viking, the longship retained its soul of adventure. Men continued to test the limits of the horizon, sailing further than maps could describe. They followed the northern lights, the patterns of birds, the color of the water, trusting in their ship to carry them where the world ended. For some, it was a path to new lands. For others, it was a path to glory or death. Each voyage carved another story into the planks, another scar into the wood, another memory into the sea. The rituals of burial grew ever more symbolic as the years passed. Great chieftains were still honored with ships of their own, buried beneath mounds or burned upon the water. Entire longships were interred with treasures, their hulls preserved in earth, their shapes hidden but never forgotten. In these burials, the ship was more than transported, was a vessel for the soul, a bridge between life and afterlife. To walk upon such a deck was to stand at the threshold of eternity, and to be laid within it in death was to be granted the journey to Valhalla. Some of these burials endured, hidden beneath soil and grass, waiting for centuries to pass before being uncovered. Archaeologists of later ages would dig into the earth and find the preserved skeletons of longships, their ribs still curving like the bones of giants, their rivets still dark with age. To see them lying silent after 1,000 years was to be reminded that these vessels were not only tools of war or exploration, but works of art, masterpieces of human craft. The decline of the longship was gradual, almost reluctant. As kingdoms stabilized and seas became dominated by larger fleets, the need for swift raiding ships diminished. The Norse converted their skills to building nares, cargo ships designed for bulk rather than speed, capable of carrying goods over long distances. The age of exploration continued, but its face changed. The dragon-headed prow no longer struck terror as it once had. Yet even as the design evolved, the influence of the longship never disappeared. The principles of clinker building, the balance of keel and ribs, the marriage of sail and oar, these shaped the shipbuilding traditions of Europe for centuries to come. But in the minds of poets and storytellers, the longship never died. Skalds continued to sing of the dragon ships, of fleets that had blackened horizons, of voyages across seas that few dared to imagine. The sagas carried these images forward, stories of men who had set out with nothing but a ship and courage, and who had returned with wealth and glory, or had never returned at all. To hear such tales was to feel the salt on your lips, the creak of wood beneath your feet, the pull of oars in your hands. The longship became eternal in memory, carried forward by words as surely as it had once been carried by waves. As the centuries turned, the dragon heads rotted away, the sails crumbled, the oars broke. Ships sank beneath the sea, or were pulled onto land, their planks reused for barns or homes. But in the imagination of those who descended from the Vikings, the image never faded. The longship remained a symbol of freedom, of exploration, of daring. It was the spirit of the North itself, untamed, restless, always reaching for the horizon. And so, when modern eyes first uncovered the remains of ships buried in Mounzat Oseberg, at Gokstad, at Thun, they were not only discovering artifacts, they were awakening legends. The longships unearthed lay like sleeping giants, their wood preserved, their shapes intact, their beauty undeniable. Standing before them, scholars and dreamers alike felt the weight of centuries fall away. The dragon ships lived again, and through them the spirit of the Vikings breathed once more. Today, replicas of longships still cut through the waters of northern seas. Craftsmen have rebuilt them, plank by plank, using the same methods as their ancestors. They sail them across oceans, proving again what was always true. These ships were marvels, capable of journeys that still astonish, even in an age of steel and engines. To watch a longship glide across the water now is to feel time bend, to glimpse the past alive in the present. The oars dip in rhythm, the sail billows, the prow rises and falls with the waves. It is as though the voices of ancient crews whisper in the wind, as though the centuries themselves row in time with the sea. And so the longship endures, not in dominance, but in memory, in culture, in story. It is carved on monuments, painted on shields, etched into the imaginations of those who still look toward the horizon and wonder what lies beyond. The dragonhead still snarls, the sail still swells, the oars still beat, if only in dreams. The world has changed beyond recognition since the days when fleets blackened rivers and oceans trembled before dragon prows. But some truths remain. To see a longship, whether in a museum or gliding once more across the waves, is to understand that humanity has always hungered for the unknown, has always sought to master the sea, has always been willing to risk everything for discovery and freedom. The Viking Longship is not just history. It is a mirror reflecting the restless spirit that still drives us today. As the sun sets over the fjord, imagine that one final longship sets sail. Its sail glows red in the fading light. Its dragonhead shines gold against the horizon. The crew rows in silence, their faces calm, their eyes fixed on the sea. They do not look back, for the past is behind them, and the horizon calls. The water parts before them, and the vessel glides onward, steady, eternal, carrying not only men, but memory itself. And as night falls, as stars gather in the sky, the longship sails on forever, bound to the rhythm of the sea, forever alive in the stories we tell. The rooster's crow echoed through the misty dawn, its call carrying across the thatched roofs of the small village. The peasants stirred from their straw beds, blinking against the pale light that crept through shutters made of wood and cloth. Smoke began to curl from chimneys as wives stirred pots of thin porridge, and children rubbed sleep from their eyes. The village lived in rhythm with the land, and as the sun rose, so too did its people, ready to face another day of toil. The knightly lords and lofty kings were far away, their castles visible only as distant silhouettes upon the horizon. Here, in the heart of the village, life was measured not by crowns or battles, but by harvests, weather, and the tolling of the church bell. The peasants who filled the lanes wore coarse tunics of wool, patched from years of use. Their hands were calloused, their backs bent from years behind plows, yet in their eyes flickered a quiet endurance. As the morning brightened, men took up their tools and made their way to the fields. Wooden plows were pulled by oxen, their hooves sinking deep into the damp earth, while farmers guided them with steady hands. The smell of soil clung to the air, mingling with the scent of dew and the cries of crows circling above. Each furrow carved into the ground was a promise of food for the coming season, but also a gamble, for a single storm, a swarm of pests, or the bite of frost could undo an entire year's labor. Children scampered barefoot between cottages, carrying water from the communal well or gathering firewood from the edges of the forest. Girls helped their mothers spin wool, their fingers nimble on the spindles, while boys drove sheep toward pasture, watching the flock with wooden staves in hand. Laughter drifted with the breeze, even as the shadow of work loomed. For in the village, every member had a role, no matter how small, and survival depended on the harmony of all. The heart of the village was the church, a modest stone building whose bell governed the rhythm of the day. Its priest was both shepherd of souls and keeper of knowledge, guiding the people through sermons and festivals, reminding them that their suffering was but a step on the road to heaven. On feast days, the villagers gathered in their finest garments, singing hymns that echoed across the fields, their voices rising with hope and faith. The church also stood as a refuge, a place where disputes were settled, and where the poor received alms, its walls a symbol of unity, stronger than any lord's decree. Markets were rare but cherished, when merchants arrived with carts laden with salt, iron tools, and bolts of cloth. The village came alive with bargaining, the clinking of coins, and the smell of roasted meat. For many, it was the only chance to taste spices or see objects crafted far beyond their borders. Children stared, wide-eyed at trinkets, and women haggled for needles or pots, while men examined blades or new harnesses. Trade brought not just goods, but news of wars, kings, and distant lands, weaving the small village into the vast tapestry of the world. But life was not without hardship. Winters pressed heavy upon the peasants, when food grew scarce and firewood dwindled. The sick lay in smoky cottages, tended with herbs and prayers, while snow buried the fields in silence. Famine was a specter that haunted every household, and many a mother sacrificed her portion to keep her children alive. Yet even in suffering, the people endured, for the land tied them together, and faith bound them to hope. The manor lord, whose hall overlooked the village, was both protector and burden. His soldiers guarded the roads and kept raiders at bay, but his taxes weighed heavily. Each harvest, the peasants carried sacks of grain and baskets of vegetables to the manor's storehouse, bowing before the steward as they surrendered a portion of their toil. Some grumbled, some prayed for lighter dues, but all complied, for resistance brought only harsher punishment. Still, festivals were sometimes hosted at the manor's edge, with music, dancing, and feasts that reminded even the lowliest peasant of joy. Seasons painted the life of the village. Spring brought plowing and sowing, hands raw from gripping wooden handles. Summer filled the air with buzzing bees and ripening grain. The villagers bent double beneath the sun as they weeded and tended. Autumn was harvest time, the most vital season, when every man, woman, and child labored from dawn to dusk to gather wheat, barley, and oats. Songs carried over the fields, the rhythm of scythes slicing in unison, the laughter of children chasing after loose stalks. Winter, though harsh, brought evenings around the hearth, stories whispered by firelight, and the weaving of cloth by flickering candles. The village festivals were a balm against hardship. May Day brought flowers and dancing, garlands draped over doorways, and songs of fertility sung around a tall pole set in the green. At harvest's end, the people gathered for feasts of bread, ale, and roasted meat, thanking heaven for bounty. In the depth of winter, Christmas brought carols and holy processions, candles glowing against the dark. These moments gave rhythm to existence, marking the passage of time not by calendars but by joy shared in common. Amid this life, stories and superstitions thrived. The forest that loomed beyond the fields was said to be haunted by spirits, and children were warned not to stray too far. Witches were whispered of in hushed tones, blamed when illness struck or crops failed. Legends of saints, heroes, and beasts circled around the fire each night, weaving wonder into the weary lives of peasants. The knightly class was spoken of with awe and fear, armored men who seemed more myth than flesh to villagers who rarely saw them pass. Marriage and birth were celebrated with the entire village. A wedding meant not just the union of two families, but the strengthening of the whole community. Ale flowed freely, dances filled the night, and even the poorest found joy in the occasion. Births brought hope, though many infants did not survive beyond their first year. Each new child was a blessing, baptized quickly in the church, swaddled in cloth, and watched over by mothers who whispered prayers for their safety. Death, too, was shared, mourned in procession, marked by bells, and carried to rest in the village churchyard. Life's cycle played out before all eyes, binding the villagers together in an unbroken chain of generations. And so the village lived, day after day, year after year, in toil and faith, in hardship and joy. Though distant kings waged wars and armies clashed across far fields. Here, life moved with the rhythm of plow and prayer, of birth and burial, of seasons that returned as faithfully as the sunrise. Each villager, no matter how humble, carried a story within them, a thread in the great fabric of time. The bell tolled in the crisp morning air, its iron voice rolling across the fields and waking the cottages from their slumber. Doors creaked open, smoke rose from chimneys, and the hum of labor began once more. The villagers moved as if drawn by invisible strings, each knowing their role and place. Life in the medieval village was not about choice, but about survival, about doing what was necessary to keep hunger from gnawing at the edges of every season. On this day, the men turned to repairing the thatch of cottages, climbing up with bundles of straw balanced on their backs. The roofs, sloping low, demanded constant care, for rain and snow seeped through with ease. Women worked by the hearth, their hands kneading dough into loaves of coarse bread, their voices low as they traded gossip about who had fallen ill, who had lost a cow to wolves, or which field had yielded the most grain this year. Children carried water from the well, their wooden buckets bumping against their knees as they laughed, even as they staggered beneath the weight. The rhythm of the seasons shaped every breath of their lives. In spring, seeds were sown with hope and prayers. In summer, weeds pulled and livestock tended. In autumn, the desperate rush of harvest. In winter, the slow endurance of cold and scarcity. In every season, work consumed them. There was no retirement, no escape. The old leaned on sticks, still herding geese or mending tools, their knowledge guiding the younger ones. Age was not freedom from labor, but a gentler kind of burden, where wisdom replaced strength. The lord of the manor rarely visited the cottages. His hall, perched on a small rise, loomed over the village, a reminder of the order that governed their lives. From that hall came demands for taxes, dues, and service. Each peasant family owed part of their harvest, a percentage of their livestock, and days of unpaid work on the lord's lands. Refusal was unthinkable. To resist meant fines or even eviction from the land that was their lifeblood. And yet, for all the weight he imposed, the Lord was also their shield. His soldiers patrolled the roads, his justice settled disputes, and in times of war, his banners stood between the village and destruction. The church, however, held even deeper sway over the hearts of the people. On Sundays, the villagers crowded into the small stone nave, its walls cool and damp, its air thick with the scent of incense. The priest's voice rang out, reminding them that every hardship on earth was but preparation for eternity. He preached obedience, patience, and the promise of heaven for those who bore suffering with humility. The peasants knelt, their foreheads pressed to the worn wood of pews, their prayers whispered for rain, for health, for mercy. Festivals of saints and holy days lit the year with brief sparks of joy processions, with candles, songs that filled the night, and meals shared in gratitude. These days broke the monotony of labor, giving the villagers cause to lift their heads from the plow and remember that they were part of something greater. In the quiet hours, when the fields rested beneath the moon, stories were told by the hearth, tales of saints who worked miracles, of dragons slain by knights, of spirits that haunted crossroads and forests. Children listened wide-eyed, clutching their blankets as the fire crackled. Superstitions bound them as tightly as their faith. A black cat crossing one's path, a strange noise in the woods, or a sudden illness was not dismissed but feared as a sign. Herbs, charms, and whispered prayers were weapons against the unseen world. For the villagers, mystery and danger lived close, just beyond the circle of firelight. The diet of the village was simple and monotonous. Bread baked from barley or rye, porridge boiled from oats, cabbages and onions stewed with beans. Meat was rare, saved for festivals or the Lord's table, though chickens sometimes found their way into the pot, and pigs were slaughtered in autumn for salted pork. Ale was drunk daily, safer than water drawn from streams, and its mild strength comforted tired bodies. Cheese, butter, and eggs added variety when they could be spared, though hunger often demanded sacrifice. Malnutrition was common, and lean years left bellies hollow and children fragile. Craftsmen worked alongside farmers, their skills indispensable. The blacksmith hammered iron into nails, plowshares, and horseshoes, his forge glowing like a heart at the center of the village. The carpenter shaped wood into carts, barrels, and doors, his hands guiding tools worn by generations. Women spun wool into thread, wove cloth upon looms, and stitched garments sturdy enough to withstand the rigors of toil. Every item carried the weight of labor, for nothing was easily replaced. To break a tool was a crisis, to mend it a necessity. Justice in the village was swift and often brutal. Theft of grain or livestock was not a mere crime, but a threat to survival. Punishments ranged from fines and flogging to exile. The stocks stood near the church, a warning to all that order must be preserved. The villagers watched one another closely, for betrayal could bring ruin, and trust was the only true wealth they possessed. Yet mercy was not absent. Disputes were often settled through compromise, overseen by elders who remembered harder times and sought peace over vengeance. Marriage was both a bond of love and a contract of survival. Families arranged unions to secure land, share resources, or strengthen ties. Wedding days were moments of joy, filled with dancing, ale, and laughter that echoed late into the night. A bride was adorned with garlands, her hair braided with ribbons, her future bound to the man she walked beside. Children soon followed, for they were both blessing and necessity. Extra hands for the fields, hope for the future. Yet childbirth was perilous, and many women bore scars or graves from its risks. Winter pressed hardest upon the village. Snow sealed the fields, food dwindled, and sickness stalked the cottages. Fires were fed with whatever wood could be gathered, and families huddled close against the cold. It was in these months that stories and prayers multiplied, when the people leaned most upon one another. A neighbor shared bread, another mended tools, another watched children, while mothers spun wool. Community was survival, and without it, none could endure. When spring returned, it was greeted with relief and joy. Bells rang, fields were tilled, seeds sown with renewed hope. Children danced around poles adorned with flowers. Men raised their mugs in celebration, and women sang as they worked in the fields. Yet behind every smile lay the knowledge that hardship would come again, as it always did, and only toil and faith could see them through. Life in the medieval village was not grand or glorious. It was a cycle of labor, prayer, hunger, joy, and endurance. The peasants who lived it left behind little more than fragments, broken tools, worn-out shoes, shallow graves, but within those fragments lay the story of countless souls who built the foundations of a world that would outlive them. Their names may not be carved in chronicles, but their hands tilled the earth. Their backs bore the weight, and their spirits endured the centuries in silence. And so, as the bell tolled again at dusk, the villagers returned to their cottages. Smoke curled into the evening sky, the last light caught on thatched roofs, and the fields settled into darkness. Within the cottages, families gathered around their hearths, the warmth of fire and the murmur of voices pushing back the night. Tomorrow, the same rhythm would begin again. For such was life in a medieval village, unchanging, relentless, yet bound by the strength of community, the hope of faith, and the eternal turning of the seasons.